Under Achaemenid Persian law, a royal bride's chastity was not a matter of family honor. It was a matter of state contract, enforceable by a court-appointed Zoroastrian priest the morning after the wedding night. Failure meant criminal liability for her male relatives. Not disgrace, not exile, criminal liability. This was not tradition dressed in the language of religion. It was written law with a punishment clause and a designated officer to execute it. The priest was already waiting. Atossa was 16 years old when she wore the bridal sash in 530 BCE. Her father was Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, the man who had conquered Babylon without a battle and freed the Jewish people from captivity. When Cyrus died, he left behind the largest empire the world had yet produced. And he left behind a daughter who, under the same legal codes that governed that empire, had no standing to speak in her own proceedings. The Achaemenid Empire ran on two legal systems simultaneously. The first was the administrative code of the king, clay tablets, ration allocations, land grants, criminal judgments. The second was the sacred law of Zoroastrian priests, the Magi, written in a text called the Vendidad. For most legal matters, these two systems ran in parallel. For royal marriages, they fused into a single 3-day proceeding. The wedding was not a celebration with legal overtones. It was a legal proceeding with a celebration attached. Zoroastrian marital law classified women by ritual purity grades. A formal taxonomy recorded in the Vendidad's purity codes. A woman's classification determined her family's standing in property disputes, her children's legitimacy in succession law, and her husband's spiritual status before Ahura Mazda. Contamination of a bride, defined precisely with thresholds, was a category of offence equivalent to fraud against the crown. If buried legal codes are the kind of history you want more of, subscribe. There is worse underneath. 30,000 clay tablets were excavated from Persepolis in the 1930s. They are called the Persepolis Fortification Tablets, and they record the administrative operations of Darius I's palace in extraordinary granular detail: ration distributions, labour assignments, property transfers. They also record women entering the royal household, not by name, by grade. Grade 1 consorts, Grade 2 consorts. The tablets use the same administrative vocabulary for women as for grain shipments and livestock transfers. This has been noted by scholars. It has not made it into a single popular documentary about ancient Persia. Think about that for a moment. 30,000 tablets. Sitting in Chicago since 1933. The most detailed administrative record of any royal household in the ancient world. And the part where women are classified identically to stored grain. That part stayed in the footnotes. If this was written law, if it was this specific, this documented, then who exactly enforced it on Atossa's wedding night? What were they authorized to do? And what happened to the women the tablets record as grade 4, pending administrative resolution? The women whose classification was never resolved. Those are not rhetorical questions. The answers exist. They have been sitting in archives for decades, in languages that took a century to fully translate. What those archives reveal about the morning after a Persian royal wedding is the part of this story that changes everything you think you understand about the ceremony that preceded it. Atossa had been dressed for 4 hours before the ceremony began. She had not eaten. The women who prepared her, not her mother, who was dead, but the senior handmaidens of the royal household, women who had navigated these mornings themselves, worked in near silence, not reverence, efficiency. There was a sequence to follow and a timeline to keep. The magus who tied the gold bridal sash around her waist did not offer a blessing. He spoke a legal formula from the Vendidad, a declaration of current ritual status, a timestamp. The sash, the kamar band, woven with gold thread and palm width in its weave, was now a sealed document, not a gift, not an ornament, a record, opened at the moment of tying to be verified at dawn. She was led into the fire hall. The man she was marrying was her brother Cambyses II. This requires context, because the instinct is to treat it as the horror. It is not, or at least, it is not the horror that matters here. Under Achaemenid dynastic law, swedoda, close kin, marriage, was considered the highest spiritual act available to the royal bloodline. It kept divine authority consolidated. It was theology expressed as genetics. Atossa was not marrying a stranger. She was completing a transaction the empire had been building since her father's death. Here is what the ceremony actually was. 3 phases, 3 sets of officials. Phase 1. The Magi established her ritual status and sealed the kamar band. Phase 2. Administrative scribes recorded the property transfer. Her dowry, her household grade, her legal reclassification from daughter to royal consort. Phase 3 did not happen at the wedding. It happened the next morning. That third phase had its own officer, its own procedure, its own written judgment format. And unlike the ceremony which was witnessed by the court, Phase 3 happened behind a closed door with no audience except the magus assigned to it, and a single record keeper whose name never appears in any surviving document. The inspection begins at dawn. She has one night. The Vendidad, Fargard 18, governs what Zoroastrian sacred law called druj, ritual contamination. The text is not metaphorical. It specifies contamination thresholds, inspection criteria, and the form of the priest's judgment. That judgment was binary, clean or unclean. It was delivered verbally to the presiding court official within 1 hour of the inspection's completion. There was no mechanism for appeal, no second assessment. The priest's word was the verdict, and the verdict was final before the court had finished its morning fire ritual. Herodotus, writing in Book 3 of the Histories, describes the consequences of a failed inspection with the matter-of-fact tone he reserves for Persian institutional practices he finds genuinely disturbing. A bride found legally deficient brought immediate consequences onto her male relatives. Not shame, consequences. Her dowry reverted to the crown. Land, livestock, holdings, the financial architecture of her family's standing. Her male relatives lost their legal standing in court proceedings. In cases recorded by Cambyses, the Greek physician who served at the Persian court, male relatives were charged with criminal fraud for presenting a deficient bride to the royal household. Fraud against the king carried a single penalty. Cambyses II had already executed a judge for corruption and had the man's flayed skin stretched over the judicial seat, so that the judge's replacement would sit on his predecessor's hide and understand the cost of dishonesty. That detail is in Herodotus. It is not contested. It is simply the kind of thing that tends to get left out when the topic is Persian cultural sophistication. This is the law that dressed Atossa in gold thread and called it preparation. While Atossa waited in the bridal chamber, somewhere in the palace a magus priest was smoothing a fresh clay tablet, sharpening a reed stylus, preparing the judgment record he would complete at first light. He had done this before. The tablet format was standardized. The older women had told her what the sash was. Not her mother, dead before Atossa turned 12. The handmaidens who prepared her were the ones who explained it, and they did so without drama. The way you explain something that is simply true and has always been true and will continue being true after you are gone. The Kamar band is not yours. It belongs to the palace. Tomorrow morning it will be returned to the Magi. What happens between now and then is what the inspection measures. Atossa understood. The gold thread against her ribs was not a gift. It was a seal on a contract she had not signed. Here is the revelation that recontextualizes every detail that came before it. The Kamar band was not transferred to the bride. It was loaned to her, temporarily, for the duration of the wedding night, and its return the following morning was logged in the Persepolis treasury, alongside grain tallies, weapon inventories, and livestock counts. The registry of inspected bridal sashes was an administrative record, a real one, which means the women who wore those sashes were, in the legal language of the tablets, assets under temporary transfer, unconfirmed until the morning inspection validated the exchange. Under Achaemenid property law, the bride had no legal personhood during the ceremony itself. She existed in a classification the tablets describe as pending confirmation. Not wife, not daughter, not consort, pending. The transaction was open, and an open transaction, under Persian administrative law, could be challenged. The Vendidad contained a specific mechanism for exactly this. A Magi priest could declare an inspection not failed, but inconclusive. The distinction mattered enormously. A failed inspection triggered immediate legal consequences. Dowry reversion, family liability, criminal proceedings. An inconclusive ruling triggered something quieter and in many ways more terrible. A council review lasting up to 7 days, during which the bride remained in a state of legal suspension. She could not be returned to her family. She could not be confirmed as consort. She was property in dispute. For 7 days she existed in no one's legal jurisdiction. Council had met before. Recently, think about what that actually means for a person. Not a legal category, a person. 7 days in which no court could act on your behalf, no family member could claim you, no authority was obligated to answer for your condition. The legal suspension was not designed as punishment. It was designed as administrative caution. That is almost worse. A Cambyses II was not a man who tolerated administrative ambiguity. Herodotus documents him in Book 3 as a ruler who used legal authority the way other men used iron, as an instrument with a specific cutting edge, applied with precision to produce specific results. The flayed judge, the executed officials, the marriages contracted and dissolved by royal decree within the same season. These were not acts of cruelty in the way we might understand cruelty. They were demonstrations that the law had no ceiling when the king held it. Within Achaemenid marital law, Cambyses held a specific royal prerogative that no other party to a wedding proceeding possessed. If an inscription was declared inconclusive, the standard procedure required a 7-day council review, but the king could invoke what surviving administrative fragments call the right of review, a unilateral authority to override the inconclusive classification and demand a final judgment within 24 hours. No waiting period, no suspension. The priest's council was bypassed entirely. Final verdict by the following dawn. This prerogative existed to protect the king's household from administrative paralysis. It was never framed as a weapon. It did not need to be. A weapon that is also a legal right requires no framing at all. For Atossa, the arithmetic of this was simple and total. The man she had just married held the legal authority to accelerate her fate, suspend it, or allow it to proceed at the standard pace, entirely at his discretion, with no mechanism by which she could influence his choice. She had entered a legal structure that contained an exit for him. No corresponding exit existed for her. She was the evidence, she was the verdict, and she would be the consequence, whatever form it took. Atossa survived. She survived Cambyses, survived his death, survived marriage to the usurper Smerdis, and eventually became the most politically consequential woman in Achaemenid history under Darius I. So what exactly happened on that dawn inspection morning in 530 BCE? And why has not a single surviving source ever described it directly? The silence in the historical record is not a gap. It is a clause. The Vendidad contains a specific prohibition governing the morning inspection ritual. The details of the procedure, what the priest examined, what criteria he applied, what he said in the judgment room, were classified as sacred restricted knowledge, accessible only to the magi performing the ceremony and the king's designated record keeper. Any person outside that circle who discussed the inspection's contents, the bride, her family, court officials who witnessed its administrative aftermath, committed a ritual offence under Zoroastrian sacred law. The silence was not cultural modesty, it was enforceable. It had teeth. This is why every Greek source approaches Persian bridal ritual from the outside. Herodotus, Ctesias, Xenophon. They circle the ceremony. They describe the processions, the fire altars, the clothing, the duration. None of them describe what happened in the inspection room. They were not being discreet. They were blocked. The information blackout was written into the same legal text that designed the ceremony it protected. Atossa survived the morning. She was standing in a different room when it was over, a receiving chamber, stone-floored, lit by a single oil lamp. A scribe sat at a low table. He was recording something on a clay tablet. She was not told what it said. She would never be told. Somewhere in the treasury corridor, the gold kamar band was being unwound from its return wrapping and logged back into the palace inventory. Weight in grams. Condition. Satisfactory for reuse. The record of the sash's return exists in a form the tablets can support. The record of what it witnessed does not. She watched the scribe's hand move, sat the scribe's hand move and understood something that no legal text could have prepared her for, that she had passed through a proceeding that processed her completely and left no evidence she had ever been anything other than a line item. Transaction was closed. The asset had been confirmed. She was, now, a grade 1 consort of the Achaemenid royal household. The clay tablet the scribe finished that morning would sit under the rubble of Persepolis for 2,400 years. When archaeologists excavated it in 1933, it took another 3 decades to translate. When scholars finally read it, they almost categorized it as a routine household inventory record. It was a routine household inventory record. Atossa did not remain a line item. This is the fact that the softened version of Persian history consistently fails to account for. Under Darius I, she became the woman who shaped the imperial succession. Herodotus records in Book 7 that it was Atossa who persuaded Darius to launch the campaigns against Greece. Not as a request, but as a negotiation, conducted from a position of accumulated political authority that she had built over decades, inside a court that had classified her body as pending confirmation on her first wedding night. She named Xerxes as heir. Darius listened. The Greek wars that defined the classical world's understanding of Persia were, in a meaningful historical sense, Atossa's decision. But here is what the record cannot give back. The Vendidad purity codes did not govern only the wedding morning. The bride who passed inspection was not released from the Magi's jurisdiction. She remained subject to ritual status review for the duration of her time in the royal household. Her classification could be revisited, her grade could be revised downward. The legal exposure that began with the Kamar band never fully closed. There was no terminus written into the law, because the law was not designed with her exit in mind. The gold sash was melted. The treasury records burned when Alexander's forces torched Persepolis in 330 BCE, 330 years after Atossa wore it. The palace became ash in a single night. The fortification tablets survived because they were stored in a separate annex, a building that Alexander's men apparently found unimpressive enough to ignore. 30,000 tablets recording grain, labour, women, livestock. All of it survived. The ceremony records, the inspection judgments, the bridal registries, the Magi's verdict tablets were in the palace proper. They burned with everything else the empire had tried to make permanent. The legal architecture had not merely processed these women, it had designed its own immunity to testimony, the sacred restriction on discussing the inspection. The verdict tablets stored in the ceremonial complex rather than the administrative annex. Classification language that described women and grain with identical vocabulary, making the horror invisible to anyone who didn't already know to look for it. None of this was accidental. Whether it was deliberate in the way a conspiracy is deliberate, planned, coordinated, consciously malicious, is the wrong question. It was deliberate in the way that institutions are deliberate. It produced the outcome it was structured to produce, consistently, across 2 centuries of empire, and it left behind exactly as much evidence as it intended to leave. 300 years after Atossa, a Greek historian writing about Persian customs used the same taxonomic vocabulary the Vendidad had used to classify women. He did not know he was doing it. The language had travelled further than the empire that produced it. The Persepolis Fortification Tablets do not deal in grief, they deal in numbers. And the numbers are the grief, if you know how to read them. Female household members in the Persepolis administrative record appear in 4 classification grades. Grade 1, full ration allotment, approximately 3 quarts of grain per day, equivalent to a senior male craftsman. Grade 2, 1.5 quarts. Grade 3, 1 quart, with diminished legal standing in property proceedings. Grade 4, half ration, pending administrative resolution. That phrase, pending administrative resolution, appears across dozens of tablets spanning the Achaemenid period from roughly 509 to 494 BCE. It does not explain itself. It does not need to. The tablets were internal documents. Everyone reading them already knew what it meant. These were women suspended in the inconclusive classification. Not failed, not confirmed, pending. The tablets record women holding grade 4 status for periods exceeding 6 months. One entry, cross-referenced in the PF 1224 series, records the transfer of legal custody over a grade 4 woman from one administrative official to another. The language used is identical to the transfer notation for a disputed grain shipment, whose origin documentation had not yet been verified. Half ration, 6 months. Disputed origin documentation. The gold thread of the Kamar band appears in the Persepolis treasury inventory as a recurring material cost, listed under ceremonial textile maintenance, reprocessed after each use. The sashes were not kept. They were melted and rewoven, fresh gold for each bride. The old thread recycled into the next ceremony. The treasury records this as standard material conservation, which it was. That is exactly what makes it so difficult to sit with. We do not know the names of the women in the grade 4 entries. The tablets were not interested in their names. We know their ration allocations. We know their transfer dates. We know, in at least one case, that a woman remained in legal suspension long enough to appear in 2 separate administrative cycles, meaning the council that was supposed to resolve her classification either never convened or never reached a verdict. She simply continued to exist in the record as an open transaction, half ration, pending. The entry stops without resolution. The tablet moves on to grain. The tablets called it household management. When Alexander the Great burned Persepolis in 330 BCE, he was 25 years old and had been drinking for 3 days. The ancient sources disagree on whether it was deliberate policy or a drunken decision that no one stopped in time. What they agree on is the result. The ceremonial complex, the throne hall, the treasury, the inspection records, the Magi's judgment archive became fire in a single night. The administrative annex where the fortification tablets were stored survived. Nobody has ever fully explained why. The current best guess among archaeologists is that the fire simply didn't reach it before it burned itself out. 2,260 years later, a University of Chicago excavation team pulled the first tablets from the Persepolis dirt. The year was 1933. The tablets were shipped to the Oriental Institute, where Richard Halleck spent the better part of 3 decades building the transliteration system needed to read them systematically. His foundational publication came out in 1969. Scholars have been working through the implications ever since. The Vendidad survived through a different route, priestly transmission, copied by hand across generations of Zoroastrian religious communities who understood it as sacred law and preserved it accordingly. But the Pahlavi commentaries written during the Sassanid period, between 226 and 651 CE, began reinterpreting Fargard 18, the female purity classification codes, as symbolic rather than juridically operative. The enforcement mechanisms were not removed from the text, they were reframed as spiritual guidance. The distinction between a law and a spiritual recommendation is, in practice, everything. The Sassanid legal scholars knew that. The reframing was not confusion, it was editorial. Every popular account of Persian royal weddings that exists, documentary book, museum exhibition, emphasizes gold, fire, silk, and the grandeur of Achaemenid ceremony. The Zoroastrian purity codes are described as spiritual tradition. The fortification tablets are cited as evidence of administrative sophistication. The grade 4 women are not mentioned at all, because mentioning them requires explaining what grade 4 means, which requires explaining the inspection, which requires explaining the Vendidad clause that made the inspection's details legally unspeakable for the women who endured it. Atossa appears in Aeschylus the Persians, performed in Athens in 472 BCE, when Atossa was likely still alive, possibly in her 70s. Aeschylus had fought against Persia at Marathon. He gave Atossa the moral centre of his play. He wrote her as a queen of extraordinary gravity, the mother of Xerxes, the widow of Darius, the woman who carries the weight of an empire's catastrophic overreach. He gave her dignity, eloquence, and sorrow. He gave her, in other words, everything the Vendidad had legally withheld from her on her first wedding morning in 530 BCE. He could not have known what that morning cost her. The law had made certain of that. The gold was recycled, the records burned, the legal text was rewritten into metaphor. The women classified below grain were filed under household management, and the tablets moved on. And the oldest surviving Greek plays, written by a man who fought against the empire that did all of this, made its Persian queen a figure of tragic nobility, because that was the only story left that anyone was allowed to tell. The Achaemenid Empire was not the only civilization that built its most sacred ceremonies on the juridical ownership of women's bodies, and the civilization that came next in that lineage developed a ritual procedure that surviving Persian sources, the fragments we have, describe with what can only be read as unease. That documentation exists. It has been in the same archive as the fortification tablets for decades. Almost no one has told that story yet. Persia buried this in administrative language for 2 centuries, and it was not the only empire that found a legal vocabulary for what it could not afford to call by its real name.